Have you ever wondered how much you are worth? Recently, I visited the website humanforsale.com to see how much my body was worth on the open market. After filling out the survey, back came my value. According to this website, I am worth $1,344,541. This painting features Judas selling Jesus for a whole lot less than that. He betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, the price of a common slave. Today we'll explore two key questions. Why did Judas think Jesus was worth so little? And why did Jesus think Judas was worth so much? If Judas was here speaking instead of me, we would all be impressed. I can imagine him as tall and handsome and rich, a real businessman. Great speaking ability and just oozing with confidence. He had the spiritual power to cast out demons and heal the sick. In the days of Jesus, if you were naming your baby after a church leader, it's unlikely you would call him Thomas or Peter or Matthew. No way. Judas would have to be the top of your pick. A friend of mine showed me an interesting letter from a group called the Jordan Management Consultants. In this letter, the consultants provide Jesus with a snapshot on the capabilities of his leadership team. Here it is. Dear Sir, our psychologist tested your staff, and here are his findings. Simon Peter is recklessly confident at times, but basically unstable. He is far too dependent on approval from the crowd. James and John Zebedee come from a strong-minded and ambitious family, but are prone to fits of destructive temper. Thomas is intelligent, but too negative for company morale. Simon the Zealot has connections with an illegal political party committed to violently overthrowing the Roman government. Andrew has no leadership qualities. Matthew has tax department connections and is not trusted by the Jerusalem Chamber of Commerce. The rest, well, they're very ordinary with no professional training, experience or basic skills of teamwork, except for one. This person has a stable background in a successful family business. He is intelligent and a good strategic planner. He has a strong self-image and charming people skills. He stands over 6 foot tall, like 70% of top management. He dresses well and is good looking, projecting a trim corporate image. In short, he is senior management material, and we have pleasure in recommending that you assign your top post to him. His name is Judas Iscariot. We all know this rising star fell down in a crashing heap. So what did go wrong with Judas? The National Gallery of Ireland contains the masterpiece, The Taking of Christ. This painting here was commissioned in 1602, but then it went mysteriously missing for hundreds of years. Amazingly, back in 1990, it was rediscovered in the most bizarre circumstances. The painting had been in the dining room of an Irish Jesuit monastery the whole time. As the monks may have been chomping on their potato stew and drinking their Guinness stout, no one knew this painting, now valued at over $100 million, was the original painting. The director of the National Gallery describes the emotion captured in the work as he states, "There's villainy in it. It drips with blood." By way of interest, a 400-year-old copy of this painting was stolen back in 2008 from the Ukraine. It was discovered recently in Berlin after a suspected gang of up to 25 people were involved in the heist. But let's come back to the story itself. This is how the Bible describes the scene. Now the betrayer had given them a sign saying, "The one I will kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." So when he came, he went up to him at once and said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. So let's take a closer look at this painting. There are a number of things that capture my attention. Firstly, we have Jesus in an act of humility and submission. He is leaning back with his hands outstretched and clasped in defence rather than attack. Notice the contrast between the submissive Jesus and the aggression of the soldier as he grabs the Lord's throat. The striking armour of the soldier is positioned as a focus in the heart of the painting. We see Jesus looking down while Judas, as bold as brass, looks his master in the eye and betrays him with a kiss. On the left of the painting, we find John in complete terror, shrieking and running from the scene. While coming in from the right side, we have a character shining a lantern on the tragic event, as if to say, I wonder what's going on here. This character is none other than the artist himself, who looks on in fascination at what's taking place. So who is this artist? Michelangelo Maurici de Caravaggio is my favourite painter in history. As I look into his paintings, the way he uses light and dark makes the core message just leap out at us. When I see his paintings at a museum and spend quality time there, it's a really special time for me. But tragically, as great as he was, history shows us that Caravaggio's gift became a curse. You see, Caravaggio started to think his creative genius was so special that everyone should do what he says and think as he thinks. He basically had the attitude, I'll do it my way or no way at all. He became proud and arrogant, and this self-focus spread to all aspects of his life. There's a text in the Bible that says, pride precedes a disaster and an arrogant attitude precedes a fall. So what happened to Caravaggio? Caravaggio became so immortal in his own eyes that he got into an argument with a man, he drew his sword and speared him to death. Many believe the issue was a bet over a game of tennis. Caravaggio then spent a number of years on the run, not only from Rome, which had a price on his head, but also from the guilt of his own sin. He went to Malta and Tuscany all over the place. He knew his pride had gotten the better of him, and now he was humbled, humiliated by his actions. You know, if anyone could identify with the guilt and shame of Judas, it was Caravaggio. But things got worse. This is one of Caravaggio's most gruesome paintings. Many believe it was one of his last works. Here we have David killing Goliath. The victor is not joyous or jumping up and down in celebration. If anything, David has a fairly demure, sad look on his face. Why? Well, many believe the head of Goliath is none other than Caravaggio's. It's a self-portrait. Look how tragic this face is and how lost he had become. On the sword that kills Goliath is the abbreviated Latin inscription HASOS. The Latin meaning in English, humility kills pride. Caravaggio died while wandering his way back to Rome. He'd produced many masterstrokes of history, but at the age of 38, he was gone. Most likely the result of malaria, pneumonia, or maybe even lead poisoning from his own paints. But what about Judas? Did he have the same issues as Caravaggio? How did Judas get it all wrong? After all, he spent years living with Jesus. He watched him heal lepers. He listened to him talk about mercy and humility and love. Judas was in the inner circle and could ask Jesus anything. He was so gifted. So what was his problem? Judas, like Caravaggio, had a major issue with pride and self-sufficiency. And sadly, pride is a well from which flows 1,000 sins. It's the cancer of a spiritual life. As a result of pride, the thinking of Judas went in the opposite direction to that of Jesus. Judas based his calculation of value like many do today. He thought this way. He thought that value is based on his personal achievements plus the opinions of others. What that means is this. If you are the boss and people think that you are smart or handsome, then you have more value than the street sweeper who is seen as dumb or short or fat. So it's vital that you become a neurosurgeon, a famous actress, a stunning model, a great golfer, the latest teen music sensation, or a wealthy businessman. The reason Judas sold Jesus for just a handful of coins had nothing to do with enhancing his bank balance. The primary objective of Judas was to take both he and Jesus to the top, to increase the value of both of them. I can imagine his plan churning over in his mind. If I get the guards to arrest Jesus, he will resist their force. Finally, Christ will set up his kingdom and I will be his right-hand man. This will be a win-win. It was like throwing Jesus into the deep end of the pool and hoping he would swim. Judas, of course, would be seen as the hero who would go down in history as the catalyst for changing the world. But as we all now know, this strategic plan did not pan out like Judas expected. Jesus was arrested and there was no resistance. When Judas realised what he had done, he threw the 30 pieces of silver away in shame and disgust, and now he was left with nothing. Under his understanding of value, both he and Jesus were now worthless. Rembrandt painted a scene with light shining on the money, and Judas was kneeling down, hoping the priest would take it. James Tissot captured the sickening scene, as Judas then went out and hung himself on a tree. And Judas, of course, has gone down in history as the worst sinner of all time. In Dante's Inferno, he is pictured in the lowest regions of hell in the mouth of Lucifer. His back is being raked clean of its skin, while his head is inside the devil's mouth. His legs are still on the outside, kicking. But let me share something with you. Jesus would have forgiven him in a heartbeat. Did you know that? Why? Because in the heart of God, every human being is of infinite value, no matter who you are, where you live, or what you've done. And that included Judas. And if that included Judas, I can assure you that no matter what you've done, that also includes you. The important issue in life that determines your value is not your achievements and what others think about you. It is God's achievements and what He thinks about you. Let's take a look now at why we are so precious and priceless to God. Here comes the good news. I propose the formula for determining value as this. Value is the maker plus the owner plus the buyer plus the quantity. Let me explain this with a particular focus on why you are so valuable to God. The first key ingredient to value is the maker. If Stradivarius makes a violin or Picasso paints a work of art, it's worth more than if you or I did it. Added to this, an item is usually more valuable to the creator of the product than to anyone else. In my home, there is a table. When visitors come to our house, I often guide them towards this table. Now, usually I'm pretty hopeless at making things, but this is a table that I made. Many times our guests, as they look at this table, they'll say, "Whoa, look at that. Who made it? Where can we buy one?" Well, you can imagine how I feel when they say that. But let me say something. I wouldn't sell this table to anyone. Why? Because I designed it and made it with my own hands. This table's not for sale because this table is part of me. The Bible says we are His workmanship. In other words, we were designed and made by the Creator God of the universe. The key point? you are priceless. The second issue that determines value is the owner. Who does this or that belong to? To illustrate, John F. Kennedy's golf club sold at auction for over $700,000. These clubs had old technology shafts and no doubt a well-worn bag. Yet they were worth over $700,000. Why? Because they belonged to a famous United States president. The 1975 Ford Escort of Pope John Paul II sold for a staggering $700,000. That car's not worth $700,000, but it was to the buyer. Why? Because it belonged to the Pope. I noticed back in 2013, the manager of Manchester United, Sir Alex Ferguson, he had his final piece of well-chomped chewing gum on the market. How much would you pay for this chewing gum? Try a sales price of $600,000. The value of the gum was not due to the value of the physical product. It's not as if the buyer pulled the gum out of the case and said to the world, "I now have the most perfect piece of chewing gum on the planet." It was used. The value was totally due to the owner of the product. Even Napoleon's old toothbrush sold for $21,000. So what's the point? You might see yourself as pretty worthless, but you belong to the King of the universe. God sees you as priceless. Thirdly, value is determined by the buyer, the one willing to go out there and pay the price. Now, this is quite subjective. What is a rip-off to me could be a real bargain to someone else. Let me illustrate. The most expensive painting ever sold is called The Card Players, and the artist is Paul Cézanne. Now, this looks a fine piece of art, but how much would you be willing to pay for it? Try $250 million. It's not worth it, to me. The painting number 5, 1948 by Jackson Pollock, sold for $140 million. It's not worth it, to me. When the Australian Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, purchased another one of Pollock's paintings, Blue Poles, back in 1973, it caused an outrage. One newspaper headline said, $1.3 million for dribs and drabs. Another said, barefoot drunks painted our $1 million masterpiece. Australian residents were saying loud and clear, it's not worth it. Little did they know it would now be valued at up to $300 million. Then there is Woman Number 3 by Willem de Kooning. Woman Number 5 is located in the Australian Art Gallery in Canberra. Number 3 sold back in 2006 for $137.5 million. Now, surely you would all agree that painting is not worth it. To us. But here's the point. Someone has purchased those paintings. In fact, when I was in the Getty Museum, I heard a visitor ask the tour guide, "How much is that painting over there worth?" The answer? Whatever price someone is willing to pay. It reminds me of a visit to Paris. My wife and I were walking through town and we found our way into a famous retailer, Galeries Lafayette. The first store we went into was the shoe store. There were shoes everywhere, hundreds of them. My wife found a pair that she really liked, so she turned them over to look at the price. $5,000. Now, my wife is accustomed to shopping at another famous French retailer, St. Vincent de Paul. So this posed a major problem. She quickly said to me, "This is ridiculous, let's get out of here." "Hang on," I said, "there may be some specials." So we wandered up to the on sale section and found a nice pair of sandals. How much were they? Oh, they were only $1,300. None of these shoes are worth it. This is a rip-off. How dare they? But then I thought to myself, hang on a moment. Someone must be willing to pay for these shoes. This shop is in the most expensive part of town. In fact, it's not just town. This is Paris. It would have huge overheads, and yet it was clear that business was booming. Why? Because value is determined by the one willing to pay the price. And what may be too expensive to you might just be the greatest deal of the century to someone else. So how is this relevant to us? The Bible says you are bought with a price. Peter wrote, knowing that you were not redeemed with corruptible things like silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ. God paid the highest price imaginable to purchase you. Not silver or gold, but the precious blood of Christ. What is God worth? $1 million? $1 billion? $1 trillion? In God's view, his worth is the same as your worth. Your price was his life. God's worth is unlimited. So is yours. My value is not just what humanforsale.com says. I'm not just worth $1,344,541. God paid his life for me. He values me as much as he values himself. Therefore, we are priceless. The final factor that determines value is the quantity on offer. A 1963 Ferrari GTO sold back in 2013 for $52 million. That was a record for the time. Why is it so valuable? Well, not only because it's a Ferrari, but also because only 39 of them were ever made. To find one and buy one now, it's a very difficult proposition. You see, the more rare an item is, the more valuable it becomes. Here's the point. No one else in the world is identical to you, and that's a good thing. Because if there was someone identical to you, your value would decrease by 50%. No one ever could be like you. Not even God makes another you. The reason is this. Because God has given you to you so you can make you what you want you to be. You're made up of your choices, and God allows you to make those choices. In the Getty Museum in Los Angeles is this painting called The Ransom. The artist is a man by the name of John Millay. Now, as soon as I saw it, I stopped in my tracks and I studied it. What impressed me was not only the vibrant colours, but the story this painting portrays. The Ransom shows a 16th century knight paying a ransom in return for his two much-loved girls. You can see one captor holding a bag full of money, while the knight is handing over more precious jewels. The two girls are finally back in the safe arms of their father. When I was looking at this painting, a story from Venezuela came to my mind. In this story, a young girl was kidnapped and the ransom requested was $10 million in either cash or precious jewels. Now you can imagine the worry and the stress and the panic within the heart of the parents. Now just say a man calls the father and he says this, I hear your girl has been kidnapped. They want $10 million. I've got some good news for you. Really? I think I can get you another girl and this one will only cost you $50,000. Do you think the father would be interested? No. Why? He doesn't just want a girl, he wants his girl. Sometimes we think that because God has billions of people, we don't really matter. Over the years, my wife and I have had many people talk with us about the struggles they experienced in life. They feel worthless, just a failure. They can't keep a relationship together. Many times I've had somebody sit next to me and say, I feel ugly and dumb and useless. The message today is that you are the child of the King. There's a special place in the heart of God that only you can fill. You are priceless. I read a story about an archaeologist who was on a trip to Egypt. He'd visited the country plenty of times with his tour groups, and on this tour he stopped by a pottery shop. He took the tourists into the shop and then he watched the potter mould a pot on his wheel. The archaeologist had seen this plenty of times, so his mind really wasn't concentrating on the action. But then as he looked up to a shelf, he saw something that did capture his eyes. There on the top shelf was a pot that was so colourful it just stood out. There were all different shades of red running through it. There was ruby and crimson and violet, scarlet, even a shade of bright red. The archaeologist was so taken with this pot, he asked if he could buy it. He figured the potter would probably just give it to him. After all, he was bringing plenty of business into the shop. That's the least he could do. But then the man was shocked by the potter's response. He said, "No." "Why? Surely you'll sell me that pot." "OK, look, just tell me how much it is. I'll buy it for whatever you say." Then the potter pulled the man aside and began telling him the story. The story of how he took a handful of clay and he placed it on his wheel. The story of how he tried and tried to make something of that clay, but to no avail. The clay was just too tough. He got so frustrated with this clay, he picked it up and he threw it onto the ground. After a while, he picked it up and he tried again. This time he mixed more water into the clay. Once again, it was just way too tough, so he just threw it back onto the floor. Well, after some time, he thought he'd give it one final try. He started to spin the wheel with his foot and he pressed into the clay with all his might. Suddenly, the most amazing thing happened. As he pressed into the clay, one of the sharp stones slashed right across his hands. Blood started to pour out into the clay. As the blood went through the clay, it became easy to work with, and he created that beautifully shaped pot. Then when he put the pot into the kiln, an even more dramatic thing happened. That pot emerged with all those beautiful colours of crimson and red mixed right throughout it. "I couldn't sell you that pot," said the potter. "That pot has my blood in it." You and I are priceless because we have the precious blood of Jesus invested in us. How much are you worth? The same as Jesus. You are a masterstroke. You're worth everything.